We've got yet another outsourced episode this week, this time by Horse Girl Studio, Cygames Pictures, which sprouted off of Cygames, the game company behind Uma Musume, Pretty Derby, in 2016, and gained a reputation and arsenal of talented animators shockingly quickly and were able to fully produce The Road to the Top last year, fittingly considering how heavily this episode features. I'll link an article about the studio's Lightspeed creation from Sakuga blog down in the description if you're interested. As with all this show's outsourced episodes, the bar for animation is still high, aside from a few small details that I think may have slipped through the cracks, which I'll point out, and some core tasks, like storyboarding, are still being done by frequent Trigger collaborators. If you look closely though, a slight difference in style is visible, with a heavy emphasis on hand-drawn textures and smoothness of motion with even frame spacing over the snappy staccato jumps from key pose to key pose that have been frequent in most episodes, so keep an eye out for those two elements. And let's do just that, look closely and break down the animation while comparing it a bit to the source material along the way to see what creative changes have been made. This one was directed by Takashi Kojima with supervision from familiar name Hideyuki Satake, and it covers the exceedingly cat-pilled chapters 43 and 44 of the manga. First off, Izutsumi is added to the end of the opening. I don't really have anything to say about that, but it's there. In this cut, Kenji Aiko adds a ton of detail to his flashback illustration of the Red Dragon, but once the illustration is colored and composited into the final shot, the vast majority of the detail disappears into shadow, with only the brightest parts shining through. At this point, the Red Dragon has been defeated and lost all its mysterious menace, and we've seen its corpse in full view in the closest thing you can get to broad daylight down here. But this image represents the first time they ever saw it, so this lighting choice harkens back to cuts like this one from episode 1, where harsh, low-key lighting defines the visible parts of its body, or these ones from right before they fought it, that just show individual parts of its body in isolation. One of the biggest themes in this episode is the portrayal of texture, particularly in ice. And the first example of that can be seen here as the ice golem emerges from the snow. While most of the scene follows the usual cell shading rules of thumb, one tone for shadow, one for midtones, and for shinier materials like Laios' armor, one highlight, the ice golem is actually made up of 4 shades, one shadow, one midtone, a highlight, and an even more powerful, mega, ultra, super highlight on top. Unlike regular shadows, which would usually just be placed on the undersides of objects like Laios' armor here, the darkest parts permeate the center of the golem and are placed in areas that don't quite touch the edges of its body, thus giving a sense of depth and slight translucence, like you're actually seeing the shadows within the ice. And the extra highlight makes the outside surface look extra shiny. Finally get to see Izutsumi in action, and this whole sequence is a mess of smear frames, to the point that they may even be overused in this cut, for example, and they certainly make the action feel more fluid, but for such a giant lumbering monster like this, it feels a bit excessive. Well, I'm generally a rabid smear frame fanatic though, so I'm not complaining. And they do also emphasize the speed of Izutsumi's movement by comparison. I love the interpretation of this panel in this cut of animation, where the simple, static, head-on framing not only mimics Chilchuk's perspective watching her from afar, but it also emphasizes Izutsumi's movements as she darts from one corner of the frame to the other in an instant. I do, however, miss Ryoko Kui's far-away kitty design, where whenever she's in the distance, she loses any detail in her head and her hair disappears, making her just straight up kitty. This one is probably my favorite panel from this fight though, once again showing that she's really more cat than girl in the way she twists around to land on her feet. And I think the animators do a good job with it, even adding the detail that her tail flicks around in this little helicopter motion to aid to the rotation, a detail that would have been a little harder to convey on paper. And that theme continues through the rest of the fight. Her tail moves and conveys her thoughts through this battle in ways that will be familiar to anyone who speaks cat. It perks up along with her ears in this shot to listen to Chilchuk behind her, but after he tells her to buy him some time, it starts wagging in irritation. When she's confident, it's stable and sticks up in the air to help with balance, like in this cut when she lands from a big leap. But a second later, she sinks into the snow and it starts wagging again in distress, this time even more energetically as she tries to free herself. This cut adds some camera movement to heighten the excitement in the climactic moment and makes it look like there's a camera person trying to follow the action. But these two layers aren't really lined up super well, so it ends up looking like the golem is sort of sliding back and forth weirdly. This jump is also more cat-like in the manga, but I think it's actually pretty cool how the animators combine her cat agility with human agility in this dance-like tuck and spin. Storyboard artist and frequent Trigger animator Emi Tamura takes this little droplet from this panel, which I probably wouldn't have even noticed otherwise, and turns it into this anime original cut that does a much better job of conveying the melting of the ice than its manga counterpart. counterpart, and shows the passage of time, and comes back to that theme of ice texture. Before going through this frame by frame, I initially couldn't quite tell where the background art ended and the animation cells began because they do a great job of blending the two together, even if I think it could have been even better without these dark outlines. But the fact that those outlines disappear at the base of the icicle do make it feel like it's at least protruding from the same surface, even if the shading style is a little different from the others. Between the ice, snow, and melted water, there are actually 7 different shades in here. One more ice texture cut, the extra highlights and hand-drawn refraction distortion in the frozen fish combined with the added bloom and blur effects from the compositing team make this relatively simple moment incredibly naturalistic. They took my boy's nipples away, and I was a little afraid they would make Laios too slim and cut in this scene like they kinda did with Fallen in certain moments, since staying well fed and hydrated is so important to survival and people's physique is an important indicator of their well-being, but he's still looking pretty good. And oh yeah, I guess Laios is actually the only one of the main group who's seen Senshi's unsheathed head before. There goes Izutsumi's tail again while she thinks about food, and now we're gonna skip ahead a bit. I can't get into every single piece of animation, but let me know in the comments what parts of the episode stood out to you. Don't be weird about it. I love this SpongeBob close-up of the Candied Mandrake, which also contributes to that theme of texture, and not only does it exhibit extra levels of highlight and shadow, but it's also colored with smooth gradients. That's fine on its own, but contrasted with the normal cell drawing of Senshi's hand and the simple texture in the skewer, it makes the thing uncomfortably realistic, as if from a different dimension than the rest of the world. There's a panel here where Marcel slips from the edge of the cave, leaving her staff up there, which is missing from the show, so it could be seen as a little unclear why she can't get to it in the next scene. Izutsumi just kind of prances cheerfully away in the face of danger, and the animators actually reuse the same top half of her body in not all but many of these frames, which makes it feel stiff and silly. Whoa, what happened to Marcel's face? It looks like she's sort of squishing this stick between her thumb and the top of her pointer finger. They can't all be winners. This cut of a wolf latching onto Izutsumi's arm with its jaws is a great example of that tendency towards smooth, naturalistic movements over snappy, stylized ones, with its even frame spacing, especially if we contrast it with this cut of Professional Dogman Kuro by Trigger insider Akira Amemiya. It's not necessarily bad, just different. In fact, I think the naturalistic movement actually works pretty well to make this feel like a wild animal. See, I told you at the end of last week's video that you hadn't seen the last of Dog Laios. This image is recreated shockingly faithfully from this classic panel. This is just way more gross in color. I'm with Marcel. And woefully unprepared to be cat parents, the team all treat Izutsumi like she's a dog instead of a cat, showering her with high energy praise and unexpected touching. Chilchuck relates. These last couple episodes have been more low-key adventures as the series introduces Izutsumi to the party and reestablishes the rhythm of the adventure, but we'll be back next week when the plot really gets moving again. So if you want to catch the next one of these videos, consider subscribing so you don't miss it. Thank you to my supporters on Patreon: Leia Pico, Mamori, Scrubbin, Katie L, Siege Weasel, Retro Hime, Serial Isle, Nutaf, Patrick Davison, Arborix, Lisette MT, Jun, Dr. Yolo McSwag, Grav G, Squid Goo, Achu, Austin and Shoji, and Julian Francisco, as well as all the other names you're seeing on the screen right now. And thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.